as a man, what do you think is the role that men should be playing in terms of promoting women? And could you talk to us about the HeforShe campaign that UN Women has?
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting aspect of our work because let's not beat around the bush. Gender inequality, men are responsible for it. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
And even in a situation where men are not directly intervening, they are behind the scene controlling it. So for instance, if you take female genital mutilation, most of the people practicing it are women.
Yes.
And when you interrogate around beating wives, the number of women that think that a wife can be beaten by the husband is higher than the number of men that say the same thing. So it means that the concept of domination of women by men, it's at a very, very advanced stage where it's even integrated in the psyche of women that it's perfect. And in some countries, you see that even when a wife is not beaten by the husband, she's not happy because it means that the husband doesn't like her.
Yes.
All of this nonsense have been based on the construction, the social construction of domination. And that's what we need to deconstruct. So UN Women's work then is to say, if men hold the power, yep, and you want to undo that power, you need to associate men. So the role of men is not in the gender discussion to come and grab resources that are normally going to women, but is to rather take whatever resources that they have themselves. And we have seen it in the past, whether it's slavery, whether it's apartheid. We have seen a lot of people who are not victim of the catastrophe come up and say, this is not right. We have seen white people in Southern Africa to say apartheid is wrong. Okay, we have seen a lot of people in Europe say slavery is wrong. So that is exactly the same thing that we are seeing with men that are normally benefiting from the patriarchy and the gender inequality, and yet they say no, there is something wrong. And one thing that UN Women has done that is very, very interesting is to show the dimension of gender inequality that touch men and that touch the society. It is difficult to imagine, for instance, a couple that is making, let's say, $100 a month. That is not enough compared to their $200 needs in the family. And yet, the man saying, my wife is not going to work. My psyche is such that my wife is not going to work. And the wife, who sometimes is graduate, is sitting in the house not working, and they are making $100 a month while they have $200 needs. So this type of reflection has started, interesting some men to say, yes, there's something wrong. How can we be in a global competition, like in a marathon, everybody's running with their 2 feet, and we are there on 1 foot jumping? So the GDP of our country will completely change when the immense resource that women represent are brought into the conversation. Let me give you an example. Nigeria has always been like number 2 in Africa, yep, behind South Africa. And some 10 years ago, Nigeria realized that they were not taking into account the Nollywood industry in the capitalization of their GDP. And once they did that, they became number 1. So it's exactly the way I look at the work of women in a country. Your GDP is small because you are not counting a great deal of your economy represented by women. So that's, in the economy, it's very, very important, because when you have a small GDP, what you can do in the global stage is reduced. You go to the Club of Paris, where you have like the public lenders, because you have a medium GDP. When you have a high GDP, you go to Club of London, where you have the private investors. When you have a very, very low GDP, you go to Club of Rome, where they distribute cereal. So your economy depends on where you are, and where you are depends on whether you integrate women into the economy or not. So to come to the HeforShe campaign, it's a global solidarity movement of men, bringing their energy, bringing their resources to support the gender equality movement. And some countries have been very, very smart in adapting the HeforShe campaign at their local level. In Malawi, for instance, they did something that is called the barbershop. The barbershop, where situations where men gather to cut their hairs and they have talks on women, etc., etc. So the orientation of that discussion will allow men to understand and some men to play like the pioneer role. And in Uganda, they launched what they called the Men at Work for Gender Equality. So they took the symbol of the Men at Work construction kind of thing and they transformed it to say men at work to boost gender inequality out of the country. And it has 4 dimensions: men at the workplace, men in town, in terms of safety for women, that is the transport system, the market, etc., etc. The third one is men at home, in terms of how they behave in the household. And the last dimension is men in self. And the men in self is to promote men keeping their sanity in the mindset even when they engage into gender equality. Because when you have privilege and you want to get rid of that privilege yourself, you need to work on your own psyche, because people will say, are you okay? They say that you are higher than the woman and you say, no, I don't want to be higher. So is anything wrong with you? So the idea is that men keep their sanity to say, yes, we want to get rid of privilege so that it will be for our own good and for the good of society.
Thank